Hello everybody, I am Tom and you are watching me play Destiny 2. So apparently, Salty Greco blew up Twitter because he suggested nerfing Divinity. Now, I never use Twitter because I'm old and smart, but hey, I smell free content, so let's get into it, shall we? We'll get into 1, his tweets, 2, why I think they blew up the way they did, and 3, whether or not I think he's right or not. Before we begin, if you enjoy the video, please leave a like and drop a sub if you're not yet subscribed. Thanks guys. So to begin, I think it's probably worth going into exactly what Divinity does, because defining the terms is usually a good jumping off point before we get into some controversy. So, Divinity is an exotic trace rifle. You obtain it from going into the Garden of Salvation raid. There is a quest in the raid that you do, and doing it gets you this exotic weapon. It has 2 major perks, Judgment and Penance. Judgment reads, sustained damage with this weapon envelops the target in a field that weakens and stuns them, strong against overload champions. What this means functionally is that after firing at an enemy for a short time, 1, the enemy is debuffed by 30%, and 2, there is a big ball that will form on the target that your entire team can see and they can shoot. Shooting the ball will count as a critical hit, essentially making the boss have a second headshot that is much easier to hit. The second part of the second perk you get is Penance, which is largely irrelevant to this discussion, but it just gives a periodic burst of damage to the target affected by Judgment. So essentially you're just giving yourself a damage buff to the gun itself, but that's neither here nor there as far as we're talking about this nerf that Salty Greco was talking about. So now we've covered what the controversy is about, it's time to highlight who is being controversial. Ordinarily, this might be a moot point. Generally speaking, whomever is making the particular argument is largely irrelevant in my eyes. A claim will either stand or fall on its merits and not the merits of the person making the claim. But in this case, I think the controversy, at least in my eyes, stems from who Salt is specifically. It is not overstating it to say that Salty Greco is one of the best PvE players in Destiny. His fire team has won the world's first race 3 times in a row. They won the Vault of Glass race, the Vow of Disciple race, and now the King's Fall race too. So it's safe to say that he is a hardcore Destiny player. As such, any claim that he makes, particularly if it is a call for a nerf, is going to be perceived by the casual crowd as an elitist condescension. Comments like, he doesn't know what it's like, I have 17 kids and I only get to play Destiny for 4.5 minutes a week. I need X to have fun and I need to relax. Now obviously that's an exaggeration of the casual crowd, but the point I'm making is the hardcore D2 fanbase and the casual D2 fanbase, generally speaking, want different things from the game, so there's always going to be backlash to any opinion that is given from one side or the other. Particularly when the opinion is coming from the elitist of the elite. Essentially it comes across as, whether fairly or not, as a rich person problem, right? It's Bill Gates complaining how expensive it is to replace his second private jet. Okay, so I'm going to read Salt's tweet thread verbatim, as it's going to be the easiest way to give context to this. It's just by far the easiest way so that you understand exactly what it is he said. So, Divinity nerf discussion. Hey, this is going to be a thread. I've been thinking about a way to nerf Divinity for quite some time. This gun is basically mandatory for most boss encounters and it makes aiming a non-factor, which is very unhealthy for the game for multiple reasons, such as removing most of the skill gap during DPS and making precision weapons way too easy to use. 2. Forcing high-risk, high-reward weapons such as Whisper of the Worm out of the meta, since they simply can't be buffed, otherwise you'll be an S tier due to Div removing the risk aspect. For the longest time, I didn't really ever come up with a viable solution. I don't think removing the debuff would do much, teams would still apply a debuff by other means, and use Div on top of it for ease of crits. Reducing reserves or mag size would probably be pretty insignificant. We have multiple ways to produce special ammo on demand, and hunters can easily negate low mag downsides by just dodging to reload or throwing a shuriken. There really aren't many viable solutions without completely reworking the weapon in my opinion. The guaranteed crits are just too good on certain bosses, but not long ago I finally came up with an idea that could work while also preserving the gun's identity. What if Divinity kept giving the crit bubble, but provided a 0% debuff that overrides any other buffs? So, for this example, using Divinity and Tether still resulted in no debuff as long as Div is applied. That will make it so if you decide to use Div, you both sacrifice someone's damage and lose the ability to debuff the target, making it a safe option, but worse compared to what a skilled team could pull off by hitting their shots. This is something that should be easy to implement from a technical standpoint, since we've already had it in the past, lower percent debuffs that you use to override higher ones, and it will make using Div a choice with a strong trade-off. This change wouldn't really affect less skilled teams that want an easy crit when running their weekly raid, since damage checks in normal mode are easy enough, and as long as you're hitting your shots, a debuff isn't needed. On the other end, it will make day 1/contest raids way more interesting, since ambitious teams will be able to risk not using Divinity and try to get a higher DPS output by hitting their shots. Let me know what you think down below, or if you have any other ideas. And then a day later, or 2 days later, today, he's come out and said, since so many keep saying this, no, difficulty isn't the point. I don't think it's needed, but what if that's what it takes? Let's reduce bosses' HP to make up for the nerf, so that casuals won't be affected. The whole point is div shouldn't be both the best and the easiest option. So, as I said earlier, the take itself isn't all that outlandish. I think the landmine that Salt has, if I were to hazard a guess accidentally, stood on, is appearing to say, hey, I'm the best at this game, and this game is too easy. His follow-up tweet today has tried to address this, noting that he doesn't want div to be the only clear option to use on bosses in raids. Okay, so now for my opinion. Salt is right. Alright, thanks for watching. Okay, let's get into some depth here. Generally speaking, I agree with the overall point that Salt is making. Divinity isn't just a good option, it is the only option for 80 to 90% of boss fights in the game. For any boss that has a long-lasting damage phase, Divinity is the best option for by such a margin that using anything else is actively handicapping yourself. I also agree that some precision-heavy weapons can't be buffed because the existence of Divinity. Salt specifically mentioned Whisper of the Worm, and god, I want a Whisper meta back. That gun used to be so satisfying. But where I start to disagree with him is in his solution. Notably, his dismissal of simply removing the 30% debuff. The large crit spot that Divinity gives is fantastic, however the ease of use 30% debuff that can last for an entire damage phase. Although it might not be the identity of Div, it is arguably the better part of Divinity. For reference, the 30% debuff is the same as all the other mainstay debuffs. The Void Hunter Super is 30%, Attractor Cannon 30%, and Divinity also 30%, and Divinity is far easier to have up for the entire duration of the fight. I don't think you even need to remove the debuff entirely, to be perfectly honest. You make that debuff 15%, hell, you make that debuff 29%, anything under 30%, and that alone would make Div's use go down from 80 to 90% of boss encounters down to 40 to 50%. Because it is not all the bosses that need the improved bigger crit spot. Only some of the bosses need that, it's the 30% debuff that's really doing it here. The prevalence of Div is twofold, and removing one of those folds, i.e. the debuff, in my humble opinion, would reduce the levels of Div to a more reasonable level and foster a more diverse use of weapons and subclasses in boss DPS phases. I'm looking at you, Tractor Cannon, and Tether Hunters. You never see them ever, pretty much, because Divinity exists. All you need to do to fix that is lower the debuff so that it's less than those options, and those options will go up. Very simple. But that's just my thoughts on the matter. I'd be interested in hearing what other people think in the comments below, but if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, consider subscribing if you're not already, and with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.